to all members who haven't honored their subscription to do so before the end of the month. This is to enable settlement of all outstanding dues by the club. Thank you. So I shall hand over to Vice President Wanja to introduce our guest speaker for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, President Malaki. Good evening, Rotarians, Rotaractors, and guests. Mine is to give you a brief summary on who our presenter or our speaker is today. He's not new to the club. He's our member and serves as our SA. But Kevin has a very interesting bio. He started his career in IT as a coder and went on to study math. He has worked across several industries from IT programming firms, investment banking, and nonprofit and to nonprofit with the UNDP in the energy management sector. He is currently the head of business at Creative YNR, that's advertising and creative, and has had a stint in the music industry. He'll be speaking to us about this evening. And he has written music for quite a bit of people. So that will be interesting to hear who he has written for. He has worked with artists, not only in Kenya, but across the region, and also the continent and the world as well. Having started as a songwriter, then a producer, engineer, and finally a composer for films and TV, as well as corporate brands. Karibu sana, Kevin. We look forward to your engagement this evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vice President Wanja. So I'm a bit under the weather today, so my voice is not going to be very, very loud. I hope I'm going to be very audible. And I will share my screen. I hope everyone can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay,
yes.
Cool. All right, so I'll get into it. So this is going to be, I'm going to talk about my journey in music. It's going to be a short story, emphasis on short, because I had to shorten it. It wasn't going to be as long as I had hoped, basically because I was a bit under the weather. But yeah, so my journey in music, I really started with a passion for music since I was a very young child. And it took me very many years to finally land in music and experience that whole world, meeting different people, different cultures, etc. But before I got there, there was a bit of a detour. I took a little bit of a detour before I landed in music. So as Wanja clearly said, I started as a programmer. I was coding, I was working for different organizations, different firms, both here and abroad. And I worked on, would consider as someone who's in the music industry, very, very boring projects. So one of them was KenSwitch, which was basically a platform that allowed banks that didn't have their own ATM backend platforms, whether it was Visa or MasterCard, to be able to transact, to be able to allow their consumers access ATM services. Also worked as a coach with companies here and working with the NHS in London to develop software to help them manage the whole medical care for patients, for doctors, for processes, all of that. So that was my background. I finally landed in music. And the last stint actually was at the United before I landed in music. So at the United Nations, I was working on that was funded by an organization called GEF, the Global Energy Fund. And I did that for a couple of years. Then at the end of that engagement, which was for a couple of years, I decided I want to take a break. I want to take a break and explore something artistic, something creative. And it took me back to what was my true passion, which was music, which was something that I grew up around. And I I wanted to learn an instrument. I was always surrounded by music, but I didn't play any instruments. And I quickly settled on a piano. You know, let me take some time and actually learn how to play a piano. So how we get started? How did I get started in music actually after deciding, you know, after the UN that, you know what, let me take a break, let me explore my creative side. So there's a Casio keyboard, very old Casio keyboard that my dad had when we were young. And this keyboard was actually very interesting because it had little sounds, you know, drum sounds. You could create patterns. You could connect it to the radio in the house and play things and record them. And I was really fascinated by this thing. So I decided I couldn't play music, you know, like sheet music, which has your staffs and all those other things. But I could play by ear. So I'd hear something and I'd spend hours and hours and hours until I could recreate it on the keyboard. So that was my experience in trying to learn how to sorry, I don't know why my do not know why my thing is not working. Yeah, so that was my experience in trying to, you know, to learn. So I used to learn by playing by ear, and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, you know, how to play different things and composing. And I decided, let me take the first step. Let me actually take the first step and do something. After taking, this was actually, you know, months. I'd say it was probably between 8 to 10 months of learning. You know, I'd hear a song on the radio, try and recreate it as best as I could. And then I started writing. I got tired of actually playing other people's things, and I started to compose my own pieces of music. And I said, you know what? It's time to take the first step. It's time to take a step and figure out how to do this. So at that time, you know, especially I was young, and the people who were around me at that time were also young people who were also into young music, etc. And there were these two guys who I'd heard of, and they actually had a song, and I was introduced to them actually by another friend of mine, who was an aspiring rapper. So we quickly formed a group, and he introduced me to these two other guys and said, you should hook up with these two guys because they actually have a song. The song wasn't out, but they you know, they'd recorded it, they had it on a CD, and they used to play it for their friends. So I told them, okay, and introduce me to these two guys. So at the time, it was these two guys. It was Big Pete and it was Issa. And so I was very, very fascinated. I was like, wow, these guys have a song. You know, they've recorded. It's actually on a CD. You can actually play it whenever you want. And it sounded like a proper song. And at the time, the song was actually, it was Issa's song, but it was featuring Big Pin. It was called Joe. And I was very fascinated. Now here were people who were actually doing something that I was sitting at home to do. So I told them, you know, even me, I write stuff, I compose stuff. Very curious to know, you know, how did you guys end up creating this song? This guy in South B, he's on read our song, we'll take you to the guy. So they take me to South B, and I go to this house. It's actually an estate, and everyone just used to say 847. So I get there, and then I meet these guys, Ogopa DJs, and there was one guy in particular who was the main producer. His name was Lucas. And Lucas was a very interesting guy. I'd actually call him a very, very powerful mentor for me. And I used to wonder, like, you know, he would be very chilled out. He was very, very quiet. Would just hang out. He would just hang out there, and then, you know, people would sit outside the studio. Actually, the studio was the SQ to his folks' house, 47 in South B. So people would just hang out there and then wait to be called in. And you get called in, it's actually like you're almost being summoned by a priest to go inside. So I sat there for a very, very long time, trying to figure out how do I actually, sorry, one second, I don't know, my computer is hanging for a minute. Sorry about that. So yeah, we would hang out. People would wait. We would just sit outside there, and then guys would be called in one by one. And I actually went there with my humongous keyboard, waiting to be called. So when my turn came to be called, because this guy's went and this guy outside there is waiting to. And then he was like, "Who's this guy?" I was like, "Some guy, we don't know him, but he has a keyboard." So it was very odd because everyone who used to go in there, mostly were pop artists or rappers or this, that, the other. So they would go in there with their, just themselves, or maybe with a paper or a demo tape. And here I am with a keyboard. So when I got in, he asked me, "So what do you do?" I said, I'm a songwriter. So he told me, "Okay, sing." And I was not prepared for that because I thought, it would be like a discussion. We would get to know each other. We'd get to ask a few things. And he just asked me, "Okay, sing." So he really caught me, off guard. So I showed him one song. Then I think in the middle, he said, "Do you have another one?" I said, "Shit. Okay, fine. I have another one." I showed him another song. Then in the middle again, he stopped me and said, "Do you have another one?" I showed him another one. I think I showed him about 5 songs. And at this time, my stomach was, was churning. I was very nervous. I was like, this was my one chance. I've messed it up. I don't know what I'm going to do now. So after I've shown him all these things, he tells me, "You remember that third song that you showed me?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Go finish it." I think it was on a Tuesday. And he said, "Go finish it, come back on Thursday." So I was like, okay, he's not completely written me off. So I went and finished the song, went back and showed it to him. And then he said, "Okay, fine. We'll change a few things. You can't sing." So I was like, "What do you mean I can't sing?" He said, yeah, you can't sing. But the person you're going to give this song to. So I was like, "Who?" He says, "You don't worry. You come on Saturday and come at 7 p.m. after everyone has left." So now I'm nervous. I'm trying to figure out like, who is it at this point? Now I know he's the one who's worked with people like Nameless, with Amani, with Wahoo. So I'm thinking it's probably one of them, and I'm super, super nervous. Then so the day comes, Saturday, and then he tells me, "Okay, show up." And then while I'm sitting in the studio, another artist comes in, and at this point it was Macharia. So I was very stuck because I was actually a fan of Macharia, and I was starstruck at this point. So she comes and says, "Oh, are you Kevin?" "Yeah." He says, "Yeah. So Lucas told me that you have a song for me." And I'm like, "What?" He says, "Yeah, I said you have a song for me." So I called Lucas. I called him with his mobile. I said, "Macharia is here, and I think she's looking for someone." He says, "You start showing her the song. I'm coming." So now I'm on my keyboard, I'm playing the song, I'm showing her the song, teaching her how to sing it, blah, 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 blah. I was doing something what I thought it was something very, very basic. And she said, "Actually, this one is not, it ended up being a good song." So we go into the studio and she did magic with that song. Like, to be honest, she, like, what I had in my head, she did were completely like, it was the polished version of that song times a million. She was a complete artist. She did justice to that song. And I think that song ended up at that time, Ogopa didn't have any album. I think they only had like 1 or 2, and they were compilation albums. So I think it ended up being on Ogopa 2 or 3, I can't remember. The song was called "I'm Gonna Fly," if I recall correctly. And so after he finished the song, I wanted to hang around and see, how is he going to actually make it? Because when you're recording a song, it's actually like bare bones piece of music, and someone goes in, sings, and they lay on harmonies. And I didn't know all of that. Never been in a recording studio before. So, people would lay on harmonies, and I'd be like, "Oh my God, this sounds like angels," and they're doing some amazing stuff. So he said, "I need to work on the song." But in my head, when we were recording and, all the vocals were captured, I thought, "Oh, it's finished." No. I need to work on this. So I quickly out with him now while he was working on the song. And anyone who knows anything about any kind of music production from back in the day, there was a software, Fruity Loops, and people used to make fun of it. But as with any tool, it's exactly that. It's a tool and can do as much as the wielder or the capability of the person who's using it. So he was using Fruity Loops at the time, and the interface was very, very intricate. You'd have sounds, you'd have to layer things, create patterns, and I don't know what. But the more I sat with him, the more I realized, this is very far from programming. And that's something that I was familiar with because of my background. Quickly took to the tool. I started learning how to use it. And over a couple of months, I think it was maybe 6 to 8 months, I started now being able to develop stuff on my own. And because of that, I was able to continue working with, several artists. I started working with Nameless. I worked with Macharia. I worked with Bebe Cool from Uganda, and a lot of different artists across the stable, the Longombas, Big Pin, the Kleptomaniacs, Mr. Lenny, and I was very fortunate to be able to work with all of them. At this point, having worked with all these artists, co-writing, producing, helping to arrange the music, I was now to learn about the engineering part of it. So at this point now I realized, kumbe, this thing is actually serious. It's turned from something that I said, let me take a break, learn how to play the piano, and now it's becoming serious. But I wasn't telling anyone, by the way, that it was something that I was doing. And part of that was actually influenced by Lucas, because one of the things that he did, having the name out there, having the name front, and not him as a person, to get very honest feedback. So, he used to DJ for boys. So he would go to places like Kengeles, he'd be there playing, he'd play a set, play some international songs, then throw in a local song that he'd been working on and see the reaction. People would come and say, man, that song sucks. Then he'd know, okay, back to the drawing board. Or come and say, what the hell was amazing. And that's, better and better over time, because he didn't put his identity or his ego out there. He wanted to get honest, candid feedback. And I think that also influenced the way I approached I didn't want to be a name that was out there. I just wanted to be able to, for me, actually just being allowed into that world was something that I was very excited. So I continued to do it. But at the time, I was also in a serious dilemma, because I remember taking a break, and now I needed to, start. So I was working in IT as a programmer. So I used to go to the studio in the evenings and do my day job. So at this point I was struggling. I was like, how do I balance these two? Do I quit my job and focus on this thing, or do I, focus on IT and pay bills? But what? You live only once. Follow this thing and see where it takes you. And at the time, having worked with Lucas and the team for so long, I was working on their sound. I was working on their style of music, the kind of artist, and I really wanted to develop my own unique sound. Me as Kelvin, the influences that I'd grown, because I grew up listening to a lot of different music. In our household, if you're a cook, country music is staple. So, Saturday mornings when my mom wasn't going to work, we'd be full of Don Williams, Charlie Pride, Kenny Rogers, all those things. And then at the same time, my dad also had a very eclectic taste. He'd listen to the Police, he would listen to Bob Marley, he'd listen to Stevie Wonder, all these different guys. So I was really exposed to different genres of music growing up. So I really wanted to define what is and at that point, I approached Lucas and told him, okay, I really work on something that would own. And he said, okay, for you to do that, since you're a songwriter, to work with singers, not rappers, not hip hop artists. You need to work with singers. You're the one who wants to do this. You figure it out for yourself. You get your artists, work with them. We'll support you. So I went out and I discovered 3 artists. Actually, at that time, they had never stepped into a studio. They'd never done anything. They'd never done it professionally. And a lot of them were actually gospel artists. So the first one her name was Eunice, who later came to be known as Karma. She did some songs like Tatizo with a couple of other artists. And she was one of the artists that I managed to convince Lucas for her and produced for her. So that was actually a very great experience. The second artist was Kambua. At that time, she had never recorded anything. No one knew her. introduced to her through a friend of a friend. And then when we started producing and writing songs for her, and she started getting a lot more exposure, Eunice actually came and said, Karma, that is, she came and said, actually, there's another friend of mine who knows this chick who sings in a church, and she's really, really good. I think you should meet her as well. And that's how I was introduced to Masi Masika, who had also not sang anywhere before. So she, we did a couple of songs. I think we did maybe 3 songs, and that was it in the very beginning, our very first 3 songs. For Kambu, I think it was about another 4 songs. Then for Eunice, we worked on about 5 different songs, 5 to 6 different songs. And at that point, I was really, I was feeling like I'm now defining my own sound. I'm writing, I'm doing what I like. And I take a step further. So at this point, I realized, what, for me to grow, I actually have to leave. I have to leave Ogopo. I have to the confines of this thing. So I partnered with a guy who was a very close friend. His name is Fakiliwali, who's actually current manager to Nyashinsky, and David Madenge, nameless, who also wanted to leave Ogopo at the time. And we decided, let's form our own record label, things our own way. Let's do the things that the way we feel they should be done. Let's explore. Let's not be new things. And at the time, I also knew Faki very well because he was the manager for Kleptomaniacs. So we formed a company, a record label called Zari Media. And that at that point, by the way, this had nothing to do with Zari Hassan. This was, I believe, actually just after post-election, if I'm not wrong. So, there was no story of Diamond or no influence. And actually the reason we liked the word Zari is because when we were searching for a name, we came across the word Zari. We actually looked for a name for a very long time, probably 8 months. And it was an Ethiopian word, actually meant something of golden quality. So for us, we said that should represent who we are and what we want to do. We want to do something of quality, the gold standard. And we started the company. So I also wanted to, because at that point I'd only worked with Lucas as a producer, and I really wanted to learn from other people. So I spent a lot of time with Bruce Odhiambo, learning, what is it that makes music memorable? How do you create music that speaks to different generations, whether they're young, whether they're old? I spent a lot of time with Tejo Sa, trying to understand how do you tap into urban culture. At the time, he was doing a lot of work with Necessary Noise. So I was like, how do you tap into that urban culture to create something unique and memorable? I also was introduced to a gentleman by the name of Thabo Susa, who was really, really passionate about African music, real, authentic African music with African instruments, with African language. And I was very curious about that because up to this point, I'd only been dealing with electronic music, so to say, instruments that are electronic, drums that are electronic. But he was someone who was actually about going to the studio, go with your Nyatiti, go with your whatever it is, and record and sing. So he exposed me to that. And then lastly, there was Musioka. I used to spend a lot of time with Musioka because first we were friends from before that. And then he also was the only person who I knew who had actually gone to study this stuff. Like he had actually gone to a school, to study how to make music. So I was really trying to pick his brain. Like, how do you do these things? How do you, other than making music, because it studied not only music making, but the music business. So how do you actually run music as a business? So I spent a lot of time with these 4 people trying to understand and define my own sound, my own space. And like I said, Thabo Sisa exposed me to that whole recording of African music and instruments. And I did a lot of work within that space because this was something now new and fresh for me, interacting with instruments, different musicians. And prior to this point, I'd been dealing with a lot of what I'd call bougie artists, your Mr. Lenny's, your Namelesses, etc., etc. But then now I got someone who has come from Rongo, or someone who's come from Kisii, like but he has raw talent. So it was really that process of trying to not shape them to fit a certain audience, but allow them to express themselves the way they felt. So after that, I decided, okay, you know what? If I continue working with artists here in the country, I want more of what I've done in the past. So I decided, let me broaden my horizons. Let me actually just leave, go outside and start working with different people. So when the first people that I actually worked with were a couple of artists from Nigeria. So the first guy was a guy called MI, which is Mr. Incredible. He was a rapper, and he was a very, very, very talented rapper. And he had like a message, he had a purpose, he had a vision. He was very clear in what he wanted to do, and that really drew me to him. And we worked on a lot of songs with MI. There's another guy also at the time called Ice Prince. He was also a rapper, and they were very, very good friends with MI. So I worked on a couple of songs with Ice Prince. There was a Ghanaian reggae artist called Mini. I think I did about 2 songs with him. Then there was the young, at that time, young and up and coming, a young guy called Wande Cole. He was very exciting to work with. Like, this guy is a guy who never ran out of energy or ideas. And even when he was sleeping, like, we'd walk into the studio at 2 a.m., catch him napping on the couch, and you tell him, don't go and sleep. The guy wakes up, Baramoja, and he's like, oh, but they have this chorus, and he jumps in and he has a song, literally in seconds. Like, it was really amazing to work with. Also had the lucky opportunity to work with the Banja at the time. After working with all these other Nigerian and the Ghanaian artists, I was introduced to him, did 1 song with him. And then after that, worked with people who at the time I felt like they were my idols. Like, these guys had find the happiest memories that I had from back in the day. So these 3 guys were TKZ. And I remember even when I met them, I used to joke. I used to tell them, there's a song of yours that in Kenya, we used to say, show me your ngoda, which means your underwear. And they're like, no, man, that's not what that song says. And they, so we quickly formed a bond because of that. Now, because of that experience, having worked with people who are approaching another period, which is a big opportunity. And that was the 20 World Cup in South Africa. So, the opportunity came. Quickly, we heard that, they're working on an album for the 2010 World Cup, and was being done by Sony. And everyone, every producer on the continent was trying to get on that thing. But a lot of people were not able to get the opportunity because they had worked in their local markets for too long. But for me, simply because of that, willingness to try to explore, to experiment with different artists from different genres, different countries, different styles of music, they quickly said, okay, you know what, let's talk to this guy, because he seems to be able to any environment. So Sony then came and approached, and they said, okay, we want to do something. We to collaborate, and we want to work with 2 artists. We want to do a collaboration because we strongly feel that even the World Cup is something that is about bringing people together. So the of this collaboration, in my mind, it was Nameless. And so there was a song that had been written and it started, and actually Sony sent us a theme. Say, just work around this theme. We're trying to get someone else. You guys do your part, then to us. So the song was recorded with just Nameless's parts, and then it was sent back. Now we were missing the second part of the equation. Now, when we were with the second part, we started hearing rumors, man, these guys are gonna get, I don't know who. Apparently, they've even signed Shakira to do this album, blah blah. So now we're waiting. We're anxious. We can't wait to hear who's gonna be on this collab with Nameless. So then they tell us, you guys come over. We wanna play for you the song. but you can't talk about it because it's not final. Like we haven't finalized the paperwork. The song was done, but they hadn't finalized on the paperwork. So when we got into the studio, they could see the anxiety in our faces. We're anxious. We really want to know. We're excited. We want to know. And then they drop it on us. Who's the second artist? It's Akon. At this time, like I remember, I clearly remember thinking in my head, by the way, Kesho, I'm going to buy a house. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I've always wanted a yacht. Now I'm building air castles. But the label was right to tell us, that don't get too excited because we haven't finalized on the paperwork. And at that point, they weren't able to come to terms because Akon wanted a lot of money to this thing, and he wanted more control over the copyright. So then that whole song was shelved. And then we ended up doing something different, which still gave us a lot of exposure with an artist called Macharia. So we did a song called One Day. And this guy was actually a very interesting artist. So he's an Israeli Jew reggae artist. If you had asked me in a million years about someone with that combination of Jew who sings reggae, I mean, it does not compute. But they did a song, collaborated with Nameless, and a couple of other songs that also worked on for the World Cup album. But this was the one which directly was involved in terms of writing, producing, all those other different elements. So that was a big step. And this actually opened up a lot of doors for me at the time. So having gotten that exposure and having worked with Sony and came across this little show you might know of called America's Got Talent. And in America's Got Talent, there was one specific act who was on the show. Her name is Lindsay Sterling. So her whole act was, she used to play covers of popular songs, but with her violin. And so we started talking with Lindsay because I'd reached out to her while she was on America's Got Talent. So and we kept on saying, one day we need to do something together. She's like, yeah. And those are the stories. Anywhere you go, people are like, yeah, we should do something together one day. Yeah, and that story dies. We move on, forget it. So a couple of years later, this song comes out. We Found Love, Kelvin Harris featuring Rihanna. So, and I remember this song was huge. Like it used to play everywhere. Everywhere you go, it was the song. It was like a theme of that year. It was the anthem of that year. And I remember reaching out. Actually, Lindsay reached out and said, I love this song. Have you heard this song? I'd really like to do something with it. And then we started talking. And we were like, no, but you know what we should do? We should do it with an African twist. And that's exactly what we did. So I worked with her on an African version of We Found Love, with chants, even the instrumentation, all that. The singing was very, very different. So she came with her violin and we did an Africanization of this, and we had to send it actually back to Rihanna's record label to get permission to release it. And they're like, man, guys, go for it. It sounds good, and it only makes our song even more popular. But of course, there was the caveat of you guys need to pay us our royalty licenses every time, for the money that you guys collect, because it's a cover. And we're happy because it gave us a lot of exposure. But then after this, I really wanted now to do something, because at this point, remember after leaving Ogopa, I had now started working with a lot of international acts. And I said, I need to actually come back home and work with a lot. I need to find an artist that I can actually work with. And I didn't want to work with a known artist who was established or had a brand or a name or a sound that they had to live up to. So when I quickly came back, settled, found these three young guys, who turned out to be Elani. And we quickly started having conversations, and actually met Elani through Maureen, who's the one on the left. So worked with them on their first album, and that was a very, very exciting period for me because they were young, they were passionate, they were talented, they were disciplined. And I worked with them for their entire first album, except the song Jana Usiku, which was done by Musioka. So this was, I felt very, very happy and content that I'd actually done something from the ground up without building on someone else's achievements. So after that, I then decided, okay, what's the next thing? What's the next thing for me to do? And I realized that I have a passion for film. I really love movies. And every time I thought of movies, whether it was The Gladiator, whether it was The Pirates of the Caribbean, whether it was Lion King, whether it was The Batman Begins, all these movies had something that I loved about them, which was the film score. And I wanted to know stuff about that world. And I tell you, persistence pays off. Never let anyone tell you that persistence doesn't pay off. So when I started digging around trying to find out, what happens in that world of films, because the name that kept on coming up was this man. His name is Hans Zimmer. He's one of the most, if not the most successful film composers of all time. And like I said, persistence pays. I hunted this guy down using all the contacts that I had, whether it was people, whether it was Akon's people, whether it was Lindsay Starling's. I hunted this guy down. And eventually he, I was given audience and I spent a lot of time with him. Those are times that I treasure, met him in the studio, spent a lot of time, was explained to me about how sound and music works in film, how to create emotion, how to create suspense. And, I really, really treasure the time, because I was about, I would actually say mentored by him, working on a few small projects, on being able to do other things in the film and TV world. So that was an amazing experience for me. And then a lot of people then ask, okay, so how did you end up in advertising after being in, in that world industry? Now, specifically, what happened is around a couple of brands came calling. And there were a lot of brands, but the three main ones actually that were the ones that, sort of made the penny drop were Coca-Cola, Diageo, and Nestle. So these three brands, they came and, they were like, oh, we've heard about you, blah, 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 blah. We want you to do this and that and the other, and we want to work with these artists, and we want you to create this kind of sound and, this kind of signature sound for our brands, for this campaign, for that, the other. And before I was interacting with them directly, I was dealing with the advertising agencies that used to handle these three brands. And I used to wonder, how do these people do this? Who is in charge of actually saying, telling Coke, work with artist X, and then go and look for producer Y to do something? And I was very curious about, what exactly do advertising agencies do? And these were the things that came up. They create brands, they create experiences, market, they drive value, they do product development. And I quickly saw a link between the two, between what they do and what I do. When you're coming up when you're developing an artist, you're creating an identity, you're trying to market them, you're trying to build recognition. There's product development when you're creating a sound. There's product development when you're creating an album. You're trying to create an identity for them. You're trying to understand who their consumers are. You're trying to create a business so that that artist or that service that you're providing, whether it's songwriting, whether it's production, whether it's composing, you're trying to create a business so that it's sustainable. And I realized it's actually not too different or too far off from what I was doing. So that made me curious. And I wanted to understand how that side of the business worked. So I found a couple, I did a little bit of research and identified some advertising industry companies in the market. And the first one that I settled on, which at that time was the biggest name that I knew, was Scanad. So I went there and I was working them, but I didn't stay there for very long, primarily because what they wanted me to do was more of what I had been doing, specifically writing. So they wanted me to come up what you call a copywriter. So you'd, write ads. And that for me wasn't appealing because I wanted to learn not how to write ads. I wanted to understand the business of, how do you actually determine that this brand should work with this sort of artist, and how do you determine that this campaign is the right campaign? So they used to make me write ads. So I left after a very short time, because they wanted me to be a writer, and I didn't feel that there was growth for me in that, because that's something that I'd already experienced and done in a different industry, in music, but still was still writing. So I then moved to Ogilvy. And for me, this was a place which, I found and I felt very, very comfortable, specifically because they had so many different arms. They had a healthcare practice, they had a government practice, they had a non-profit practice. They even had a management consulting arm, which exposed me to a lot of different things about advertising. And I started to understand, this is what brands are looking for. This is why, they will do a campaign this way instead of this way. This is how they determine who their consumers are. And then continued again, moving to geometry, which was part of the WPP group, and then eventually landed where I am right now, which is at VML Y&R, studying, which is basically going down a rabbit hole. And if you follow this presentation from the beginning, you see I have a tendency to go down rabbit holes. I started with just writing, then discovered, oh, there's a software. I went down that hole. Then decided, okay, you know what? Oh, you can actually do more than just electronic music. Down that rabbit hole, then decided, there's actually all these things done in a canvas called a record label. Went down that rabbit hole. So it's the same thing even in advertising. It took me down a rabbit hole, and that's how I've ended up at VML Y&R. So that, in a nutshell, is a very short, like I said, I promise it to be a short presentation about my journey in music. But clearly, for me, it was really a fulfillment of a dream that a passion that I had from a child. Like, music had always been part of who I was, had been core to who I am. It's something that I grew up around, and I have no regrets about having the industry and all the people that I met, all the places that I went, all the experiences that I had. So open to any questions that you may have right now. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. I can start with the ones that had posted in the chat box. Emma, I think you're one of them. If you can ask your question.
Okay. I think I was just curious on how Kelvin was work with the Nigerians, Ghanaians, and SA guys in such a short time. Was it in Nairobi? Did you have to go meet them, or how were you able to coordinate? And that time, I'm sure we're not in on online, or maybe some of us were just behind. Thanks.
It was actually not a short time, and I had to travel there. The Ghanaians, the South Africans, the Nigerians that I was over a span of about 2 years, and I had to come back. So, but because at that time I was using a computer to produce the music. Once you capture the vocals, you get into create. I could then leave, spend some time there at least just to get a vibe, and then try and polish it, and then back, share with them the finished product and fine tune where we need to.
Okay, thanks. So they had to cover your costs. I mean, like a business, you had to kind of recover from them in a way, I guess, because I can imagine that's an expense. Yeah.
It was initially, because remember this, I barely had a brand. I had a new record label, so it was a cost that I initially had to bear. But then once the work started picking up in those markets, then they would actually say, "We'll pay for you to come." But initially, like the first, I believe, I actually had to cover my own costs, because I was the one who wanted and tap into that market. So I would go there and then, a month trying to figure out, what's the vibe here, what's the culture, what's the music about, who are the people I can, and I approached a lot of people. It's just that these were the ones who gave me the opportunity, but a lot of people who had approached initially were not willing. Incidentally, Dibanj was one of them. At the very, he was like, no, I'm already working with this other guy, blah, 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 blah. But once the stuff with Ice Prince and MI started picking up, then he was like, next time in Nigeria, by then, you should holler at me, we do something.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sami, I can ask my questions?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Hey, Kelvin, that's an impressive resume. I didn't know about that. To see it maybe, and I can become Malaki's manager and he can do a song. So my question is, do you still unroll the songs that you did? The second one, do you still do music?
So the first question, yes, I do, because royalties are depends on the nature of the contract that you but I do earn royalties. Money? Well, good is relative, huh? Good is relative, and it also depends on how big the song is. You could be earning because you earn royalties from usage, where it's used, whether it's used in film or TV or used to endorse a product. So the usage is what determines the amount. Airplay music, this is a song that's on heavy airplay. Those dollars add up. So yes, I still do earn royalties in terms of the music that I produced. Your second question, do I still do music? Fortunately, no, but it's something that I have purposed because I realized that the bug is still with me. I listen to songs on radio or even watch something and I'm like, oh, they do it like this, they should have done it like this. So I find myself wanting to explore and experiment still.
Thank you, Kevin.
Asante.
Just something to state something. Some members have stated that the money they've been sending to their account has been rejected. So I'll just share the account details again. Please try to use, when you're sending to M-Pesa, try to use the CAF to send your money as opposed to using the account number. And if you have any challenges, I'm sending back to the chat. So I've been told it's worked. Back to Q. Anyone with any question? Elsie, you have a question? Elsie wanted about singing, so I'm just asking on her behalf. I don't know if she wants to be a singer. Elsie. Elsie, you just asked it in the group chat. Okay. She's shy. Any other questions?
Ooh. Questions.
Wilson, any question? So I'll ask my question, no other questions. So I'm just curious, like, what was your experience with Bobopa? I remember during, this is between 2000 and 2005, they were quite big. When you mentioned the artists that we were working with, they're quite big. They used to have, every time we were on holiday. That's the question. The second one is, it's a question I ask a lot. What do you think about record labels as a whole? Lately, there's been a move for everyone is trying to be an independent, with the internet. No one wants to share the royalties, all those spreadsheets where you have to share, like Kelvin, think about that. Lastly, it's a comment. I attempted Fruity Loops back in the day. I think everyone had a knockoff version of Fruity Loops, and we're all making big house. Sadly, I ended up being an accountant, not a producer.
You can still pick it up with the.
I mean, right now it's around 14 or something.
Or you can pick up a different. I mean, I think I only used Fruity for maybe a year and a half and change. There are different softwares that you can use. So you can still pick it up. You can still pick it up as a hobby and just create, Okay, so to answer your first question about my experience working with Ogopa, I would say it was, at the time, initially it was a bit overwhelming, especially because for me, like you've rightly said, they were really, 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 really big. And here was like coming in completely green, me and my big 88 key Casio keyboard, lugging it around. Like that thing was huge. It was huge. And I'd walk around with it, it had like a zipper bag, and I'd put it on my shoulder and studio. And and at the time, remember, there were no music videos. So the songs that I would hear as I started working with the artists, I didn't see their faces. I just knew their names. So I'd hear the songs. I knew you go to the club and hear the songs. The songs are huge. So you'd be actually sitting in the studio and, you're talking to someone, and someone comes and says, "Oh, hey, what's up? Hey, my name is Nyash. Oh, yeah, my name is blah, blah, blah." And you're like, "So who are you guys?" And they're like, "We're Klepto." We're like, "Wait, they're Klepto." So it was very, very overwhelming, hanging out with them. But over and above that experience of being with those artists and being very, very green, it was working with Lucas specifically, like I'd mentioned. He was very, very key. He forced me to want to understand, to create music not for myself but for people. Because for me, even when I was writing for me. What sounds good to me, what will I like. But then hanging out with him, he would work on a song at night, then go to the club wherever he was playing, whether it was Kengele's, wherever he was playing, go listen to it. And when we're leaving the studio, we're like, this song is going to be a hit for sure. And then you go out to the club and the reception is like, I started saying, actually, you're not making music for yourself, you're making music for people. So that shaped me a lot, trying to understand that you're creating music for people, especially if it is a business, if you're trying to create a business out of it. And then thirdly, that whole thing of stepping back and allowing the music to speak for you. Lucas is someone who, even right now, if he was in the chat room, I mean, unless he's a visitor, like if he was a visitor, he would know who he is. Like till this day, he's someone who enjoys his anonymity. Once you sit and get the unvarnished truth, I remember we'd sit in Mathris, we just, from South B, we just say, let's get to Mathris, go to town and come back, and just listen to which songs they are playing. See which songs they're playing, and then he would ask the driver, like, how come you play these songs and not these songs? And the guy would say, this song, at this time we pick kids from college, and these are the, and he would get actually like that. He would get to understand, he would get his finger on the pulse of the culture like that. So that was something that I enjoyed and learned from him immensely. Appreciative for that. Secondly, your other question about record label businesses in the country. I think it was during a Temis talk where I said we do not have a music industry, we have a recording industry, because there's a lot of people who go to a studio, pay, and then they pay and they say, I want all my copyright, I want my song, but they don't know what to do with it. They have no idea of how, okay, fine, so you have a song, how will it get played? How do you get it to radio? Fine, I don't want it to be on radio, I'm going to put it on YouTube. Okay, so do you understand how YouTube works? Do you understand the mechanism, how you can monetize your song? Do you understand that you're creating a brand? So there's too much focus on people just wanting to put out music, which is not bad, because it creates diversity, it creates a lot of variety for people too, but it doesn't serve the artists because it serves the consumers because we have all this music that we can listen to. The artists actually are not spending the time to create a brand, to and to do the heavy lifting in the back end of, you know, having structures, having a manager. And, you know, like some of the artists that I work with, like they had different managers for everything. Like you have someone who tells you, so, you know, this is my touring manager. If I'm going on tour, this is the person I talk to. This is studio manager. If I'm going to, this is the person I talk to. This is my press manager. So like the people with specialist skills. We haven't gotten to that stage yet here, obviously, because, you know, music is still seen as something that is where sports was back in the day, where people are like, ni kitu anafanya mpaka ajijue, you know, because I remember even for me, until the time when I started actually working with Hans Zimmer, that's when my mom started telling people, he's in music, he does music. But before that, you know, even if you're still collecting your royalty checks, you know, I remember I went awards, she would still ask me, you know, so you don't tell people you do music, do you? You tell them that you're in IT because that's your real job. I'm like, no, mom, you know, this thing is a job, it's a business, it's a career. I make a living out of it, da, da, da. But at the same time, I shot myself in the foot because I had those. So she was like, but if you really believe it's a career, then why are you still holding on to this other one? You should really do it full. You know, if you really believe it's a career. So there's that whole thing of the infrastructure is not in place. Allow people fully monetize, but they actually don't get the money that they deserve. And anyone who creates a platform, whether it's Safaricom with their Skiza platform or any other aggregator who gives a platform, I do believe they rightfully should be allowed to monetize, but not rip off the artists.
Okay. Thank you, Rotarian Kevin. I shall hand the meeting to, for a vote of thanks, we shall have Rotarian Josiah Mwangi.
Thank you, President Sami. I'd love to say that this is one of the most interesting and surprising presentations. I didn't know all that about Kevin. I remember Mosioka mentioning about his journey in music. I thought he used to sing and then he couldn't. So he dropped out. It's interesting to find out that he had a more interesting journey. And I'd like to challenge him to go back maybe and also and explore it, since it seems it's something he enjoyed about it. And thanks for sharing this with us, Kevin.